feel like I was right in the middle of the thing. 2, 3, 4. Do da ba beep ba ba da 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 da. 154 episodes in a row, and then some damn baby has to mess it all up. He's not damn, not yet anyway. I mean, he's halfway there with me as his father, but this is also today would have been 3 years straight of not missing a Wednesday. I think I occasionally had to do a Thursday or Friday, but I hadn't missed a week in almost 3 full years. Kids, I tell you, it's almost like they're more trouble than they're worth. Nobody watches this. Certainly nobody I'm related to, so fuck it. So yeah, we're just gonna pick up from here on the third anniversary show. Welcome everyone. We have the Del Rubio sisters are here tonight, and funny man Jeff Altman. Anyway, so these three that I have picked for this week. Needless to say that I had quite a few comics waiting for me in my locker when I got to work yesterday for the first time in over 2 weeks. I guess just about 3 weeks, in fact. The new boy was born on the 14th, and we had expected him on the 18th. So I was planning on doing a Wednesday I'm in Love on the 15th. But as I might have mentioned, we were slightly sidetracked. So that means there's now, including this week, 4 weeks of books for me to catch up on, including the first week of December, which I hadn't finished before I left. So I'm just kind of slowly picking away at my pile at work, and since I'm way behind, I don't want to pick anything that might spoil something for me that I haven't read yet. But I think these are these three picks were my, even though I wasn't at the shop, I still did my weekly shop recommendation for the email they send out every week. And so these are the three books that I recommended thusly. And isn't that something? First up, this is Danger Street #1. I believe this came out last week. I really don't know. I don't know. Actually, I think it came out on the 15th. I don't now remember what this is all about, but it's a Black Label book, which is DC's new Vertigo, meaning it's a mature readers label, which never doesn't at least make me go blue. When I was in high school, because the mature readers means you have to be over 18. But I mean, I defy you to this day to show me a mature reader in any comic book store. He could be 75. It's such a fucking arbitrary, stupid thing. They could just say, don't sell to minors. That would, say it all, really. Couldn't argue that I'm not a minor. I can definitely argue whether or not I'm mature. And frankly, at 16, I was very mature. All right. First bird walk out of the way. It's written by Tom King. It's featuring Dr. Fate, as well as, I think, a couple other DC, more B and C list characters, which are always my favorite DC characters. And Tom King has also done a lot of really good stuff. He did with these sorts of characters, with like these 70s DC characters. He did Mr. Miracle, which no one has done that well since Jack King Kirby, and that's high praise indeed. He did Strange Adventures, which I still haven't read, though I do believe I purchased it. Yeah, it's around here somewhere. And but that was an Adam Strange book, and these are all Black Label too. I think Mr. Miracle might not have been, but they tend to be a little more serious. And this is something that DC has always done very well with the aforementioned Vertigo. Vertigo made its own bones with books like Sandman, but the Sandman himself was based on a Golden Age DC character, which that character even enjoyed his own Vertigo series after the fact, even though it had nothing to do with the Neil Gaiman stuff. Just to put the name Sandman on something, people were going to buy it back then. And then this, like with Swamp Thing, I would go ahead and consider the first Vertigo book, even though Vertigo didn't become an imprint at DC until 1993. But before then, Alan Moore was doing Swamp Thing. Grant Morrison was doing Doom Patrol and Animal Man. Those all became Vertigo books. Yeah, pretty much in '93. They were in the same vein. They were for mature readers, so they had swears and boobs in them sometimes. Nothing like pornographic. You had to buy heavy metal for that sort of thing, but not stuff I guess you'd want to give to a kid. Okay, I don't know if you could hear that, but it sounded like somebody removed one big lug nut from a tire with a pneumatic drill, and or removed somebody's head with a table saw. I really can't be sure, but it's a dark and stormy night here in Los Angeles, California, and of course, the thing you want to hear most on a night like this is something that sounds like a saw or drill, for that matter. That was my producer telling me to get on with it. So basically, this is just. I feel like this is going to be similar to. I think Alan Moore's Swamp Thing really set the tone for DC's mature reader stuff. Even if it wasn't called Vertigo then, it's not called that now. But what DC is really good at, certainly better than Marvel, is taking old properties that aren't quite as popular as they once were, and DC has tons of those. DC, I never really think about it because I'm not as much of a DC guy, but DC was different from Marvel, and then they weren't so much worried about a shared universe until much, much later, until the mid '80s, really. So there's tons of characters. I was going through a bunch of Silver Age DC books today, Green Lanterns and Supermans, and yeah, it's weird how many goofy characters and stories that don't count, that aren't in continuity. So DC's got like a plethora of them. Gosh, there was a book I want to say about 10 years ago, written by Brian Azzarello, that did exactly all this. Took a bunch of it was very meta. I'm not even 100% sure it's Azzarello. That's going to drive me nuts if I remember what that is. This will be good. This one's a no-brainer. This is Gru: Gods Against Gru #1 by Sergio Aragonés and Mark Evanier. Stan Sakai. And I guess Tom Bluth is not doing colors anymore. I don't know if that's a new thing. I hope he's okay. This is Gru is one of the first funny books I ever bought. Um, for those of you keeping score at home, I consider my comic book collecting to have begun on Thanksgiving Day of 1988, where I finagled $5 out of my grandmother and went down to the Thrifties drugstore in Palm Desert, California, where she lived, and I bought two issues of Uncle Scrooge, the numbers of which I've since forgotten, but I think I still have somewhere. Uncanny X-Men number 239, and Gru the Wanderer number 47 and 48. Or is it 48 and 49? One of those. And a big part of it was because Sergio Aragonés is more well known um, as an artist for Mad Magazine, especially in the late '80s. So it was like, it was like a guy you show up at a party that you're excited to be at, but you don't really know anybody. And then you see your buddy Sergio across the room. You're like, oh, I can hang out with this guy. And yeah, so I've been a huge fan of Gru ever since. I have nearly all. I One of the first purchases I made, I think I talked about it on here. One of the first purchases I made as an employee of Galaxy of Comics in beautiful Lake Balboa section of Van Nuys, California, was an early Gru the Wanderer from the Pacific Comics run, which only lasted like 9 issues, I want to say, before they went to the Epic imprint at Marvel, which itself was sort of a mature readers type of deal. Well, it was creator owned. That was the main thing. But a lot of Vertigo stuff was too. I'm not going to go on that rant again. They did a few issues for Pacific, and then in '83 or four, no, '83 is when the Pacific one started. '85, I want to say, Gru the Wanderer, which was the main title, began on the Epic imprint from Marvel, and that went for about 120 issues. I'm still missing a few of the final issues of that run. And then I think a miniseries at Image first, and then at Dark Horse. And now once they enter the Marvel series, they all kind of went their separate ways. They've all had other stuff to do this whole time, but it's been the same creative team. Sergio Aragones is the artist, and main like him and Mark Evanier write it together. Sergio does the art and the plots. Mark does the script. Stan Sakai, who is the creator of Usagi Yojimbo inks, and Tom Bluth used to do the colors. He's not doing this one. Either that's explained in here, or I'll be a monkey's uncle. Um, and yeah, they just kind of do this now. They'll do a mini series every year or two, and I never miss one. It's always good. And they do a lot lately too. A lot of the pantheon of gods in this Gru world. Gru himself, I should maybe mention, is a parody of Conan in sword and sorcery type um, stories. So Gru here he's the best swordsman. He's the most feared warrior in all the land. He's also the biggest idiot in all the land. This is his faithful dog, Rafferdo, who is definitely smarter than he is and really sort of the leader. But he's so loyal and loves Gru so much, like a dog would, that he never even thinks of it that way. And then there's a bunch of so like I want to say most of these last few minis have been like I that was one of the last I want to say Marvel arcs was Wager of the Gods. Basically, the gods are trying to manipulate uh, humanity, and Gru comes in and fucks it all up like he does everything. He doesn't use language like that though. I apologize. And they're almost always like they're very simple kind of morality tales, and often kind of reflect actual social things. I remember one time I might have told the story, but I'll tell it again. I went to a Gru panel at San Diego Comic Con. This would have been the early to mid 90s. And somebody asked Sergio and Mark how exactly they split up the writing duties, because they don't really make it clear. It always says Gru the Wanderer by Sergio Aragones, and then Mark Evanier always has some weird goofy title that is not writer. That is the only title he's not had in the pages of a Gru comic. So Evanier, who's hilarious by the way, and I mean, I don't know if I've ever mentioned Evanier on here before either, but he's sort of a big deal. He was a teenage fanboy in the '60s. He became, or in the '70s maybe, he became one of Jack Kirby's assistants as a high school kid, and that was his entree to actually writing comics professionally and editing them. I was looking through an old what was that book? Shit, it was an old Kirby book. I want to say a DC one, but I could be mistaken. It might have been a Marvel one. But the letters page was edited by Mark Evanier and the other guy who was Kirby's assistant, whose name I can never remember. Evanier wrote a lot of comics. He's written a lot of television, including cartoons. Um, he's just sort of he wrote a big history book on Jack Kirby that I read last year, the year before, finally. Good dude, funny dude. I want to say he might have even done stand up for a while, although everybody who was halfway funny in the '80s did stand up for at least a little bit. Anyway, somebody at this group panel asked how exactly they split up the work, and Mark was like, "Oh, here, I'll show you." So they both stood up, and Sergio was like, "Okay, so Mark," and Sergio, I'm not going to do the accent, but he's got like a thick Mexican accent. He's like, "And then, so I want it to be like this," and he's like getting all elaborate, and Mark goes, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, a stitch in time saves nine. I get it." So that to me, big laughs. That to me is like, yeah. Mark just kind of takes Sergio's ideas and he streamlines them. I'm sure there's some collaboration on the dialogue and stuff like that. But one of my favorites, and I'm happy to see it again. Finally, I think this came out. Who gives a shit? This is Timeless number 1, although technically it's Timeless number 2. But I'm really looking forward to this. Last year, and I'm sure I talked about it then they did this book, and it's like an extra long book. It's only $6, and it's basically, and they've done this before. They did Marvel Point One, Marvel Comics 1000, I think was like the history of the Marvel universe. No, that was a different thing. Marvel Point One is the first thing I always think of though, and they're basically books that aren't necessary. They're really just kind of a lark. But since Kang is now so popular with his appearance on the Loki television show, they're using him a lot more. But since he is a time traveler and he has that perspective of the entire Marvel universe at once, Marvel Point One was narrated by the Watcher, for example. Basically, they're just laying out. This is Marvel editorial laying out what they're going to do for the rest of the year. And I remember last year very clearly, in fact, giving you the play-by-play breakdown. So anticipate that for next week. I still have some reading time, believe it or not. And I almost dropped my comic. And this picks last week. So these obviously were not from last week, and I had to kind of flip through them to remind myself. But I haven't had dinner yet, so let's get through this. First up, it's only Teenage Wasteland #1. This is great fun. A more unkind reviewer might say it's a little too much like What's the Furthest Place from Here, right down to having a complete sentence for the title. It's a post-apocalypse slice of teen life, and it's but it's good. I don't. I'm not trying to. The comparisons are inevitable. I feel, and I doubt that What's the Furthest Place from Here inspired directly It's Only Teenage Wasteland, but I'm 90% sure that the publication of What's the Furthest Place from Here and its success, I'm guessing it's still being published, that's how this got published by Dark Horse. They were like, oh, can you give us a What's the Furthest Place from Here? Then we'll do that, I guess. But it's good. Like I say, I don't want to damn it with faint praise or, give it a shitty sort of comparison. One difference though that is significant, I would say, is What's the Furthest Place from Here begins during the post-apocalypse. So we are finding out in medias res, as they say in English class. This starts with the normal world, and it's you know our hero is kind of a schmucky kid. He's got a crush on a girl, and he's having a party, and he's bullies, and all the beats are their best friends, and this and that. And then at the end of the first issue, the world ends, and it's not an apocalypse I've seen before, so that in itself is pretty interesting. But yeah, I'm looking forward to the rest of this. I think the second issue has come out. I'm pretty sure I have it over there in the giant stack of comics. Extreme X-Men #1. Exactly what I hoped. And honestly, I mean, I shit on Claremont a lot, but I really enjoyed it. This was exactly what I wanted. It harkens back. It calls back a lot to the 1984 limited series Kitty Pryde and Wolverine, which it's almost 40 years old. But that again, like I'm saying, like I was saying last time, Chris Claremont is only interested in what Chris Claremont has written as far as continuity. I thought that since this is like the third Extreme X-Men series, that this might just continue from that, and it might actually call back to those comics, but I wouldn't know because I didn't read that many of them. And LaRocca is good. Kitty Pryde's the main character. I'm probably going to keep going with this until I'm like, all right, I can't take any more Claremont's verbosity. Thanos Deathnos is really good, although to be honest with you, even flipping through it, I couldn't remember anything about it. I feel like this is the sort of thing Marvel does now when they want to use a character in the MCU or something to that effect. Thanos is dead in the MCU, though, so I don't know how that's going to work. Well, I mean, they did a Black Widow movie after, spoiler alert, she dies in Endgame. Spoiler alert for 3-year-old movie. 4-year-old? So, yeah, it's again, it's like, I don't want to say it's pointless. It's in continuity for whatever that means, which definitely does not mean as much as it used to. To guys like me, it still might, but it barely matters to me, and I think I pointed this out before. Jim Starlin's name is conspicuously absent from this big list of creators, and I feel like I went on this rant last time, so I'm not going to bother this time. But thumbnail it. Jim Starlin created Thanos, or Thanos, however you want to say it, and many other characters from the Guardians of the Galaxy universe. Pretty sure Drax was his. Gamora, I'm pretty sure was his. Nebula, I want to say was his. I know Groot and Rocket are not, but they weren't even original Guardians. Well, neither was. Well, Star Lord though, that was Starlin. He was not an original. None of the Guardians of the Galaxy in the movie are original Guardians. Some of the original Guardians make a very brief cameo appearance in the second movie, and I think Stallone even plays one of them. Keep him out of my Marvel movies, please. I only want so many draft dodgers in the Marvel universe, Marvel Cinematic Universe. Anyway, regardless, and it's like the same old story where these guys created these characters as work for hire from Marvel. So Marvel owns them. Disney therefore owns them. But it was always kind of a given that Jim Starlin did most of this work. I mean, Thanos would show up in the pages of Silver Surfer, which I don't think Starlin ever wrote. Not at least not for any kind of long run or anything like that. So if I remember correctly, I seem to remember they gave Jim Starlin. Speaking of Avengers Endgame, Jim Starlin had a cameo in that movie as well. I believe there's a scene in that movie where they're at a group therapy session to deal with all the people who have disappeared, and Starlin is one of those guys. And pretty sure he got some kind of honorarium, for creating that character, who was like the big bad character in the Marvel Cinematic Universe for the first 4 phases or whatever the fuck. But then I think after that movie, he was kind of like, you know what, fuck these guys. And I think he was like rightfully pissed off that he wasn't getting paid more money because Marvel has made $1 billion in no small part to the contributions that in no small part due to the contributions that Jim Starlin has made to the Marvel universe. So, just not seeing his name on here feels like a real fuck you. And if Marvel editorial or anybody would be like, well, we're not working with him anymore, I'd be like, well, I don't know. That was all I could think of to talk about because I even flipped through it and I'm like, I still don't. There's a bunch of different stories by different creative teams, and they were fun, they were good, but I was kind of left at the end of it like, what was the point of this? Just to get $5 more out of me? Mission accomplished. Here's an honorary mention. This is Brick Jones, Attorney for Earth. This is actually 2 issues in one. So you got issue 1 here. You flip it over. You got issue 2. This is written by Phil Smith, created and written by Phil Smith, who I believe used to be an editor. He was a muckety muck down at Top Cow, which is an imprint at Image Comics, and he's also a regular full customer at Galaxy of Comics. I don't know if I'll blow his cover. So, yeah, he brought us these, and it was really good. Giuseppe Cafaro is the artist, and I think I might know that name, but I'd have to look it up. And then I brought it home. I read it, and I was delighted to find that it wasn't terrible because that's one of the worst things. I like to support independent artists, and I like to support local artists and stuff like that. But boy, oh boy, some of their comic books are stinky. This is not one of those. I saw Phil today, in fact, and I hadn't seen him since he brought this in. So I was like, hey, I read your comic. I really enjoyed it. When you got more coming. And he told me, again, not to scoop everybody else on this. I think he said he's got like 3 issues written and drawn and colored. I think they still need to be lettered, is what he told me, and he does the lettering. But he also mentioned Kickstarter that apparently did not kickstart, unfortunately, which he was just trying to use to recoup his losses for this, because he just published this himself under the name Fighting Lion Comics. So, yeah, it sounded like the issues will be the next 3 issues will be out eventually, probably online first, and then eventually in a book form, which is how I prefer them. But I'd still read it. The story is really good. It's so this is Brick Jones, our hero, and in this story, uh, millions of years, or very, very, very long ago, there were alien presence. I'm really fucking this up. Basically, there is a galactic federation of planets that Earth has only just become aware of, and it's not. If I'm not much mistaken, it's kind of similar to that Hitchhiker's Guide thing, where it's like, we're gonna demolish your planet. You couldn't even be bothered to look at the court posting on Alpha Centauri. That's Hitchhiker's Guide. But this is kind of a similar thing where like these aliens all show up and they're like, "Oh, hey, we need to destroy the Earth for some reason." I think that's what it is. Or maybe it's because they want to stop humans, with their space program from getting off. Regardless, since it is a federation and not just anarchy, there's a court system involved, and Brick Jones here is the descendant of the very first attorney for Earth, back when the aliens first arrived on the planet. And so now he's been tapped to be attorney for Earth this time. I mean, it's funny. It's sci fictiony. It's good stuff. I'm looking forward to the rest of it. Support local artists or independent artists, unless they're assholes or their stuff sucks. Look, I'm not here to tell you how to live your life. Okay, good. Just under a half hour first time back. Well, see you in 2024.